Head over now to what is happening with the ANC as far as I imagine this is one of the latest updates coming out of the ruling party. It's the discussions document on economic transformation, revealing how the party failed to implement some of its key economic policies. What exactly have they got to say? Let's head over there now.
Particularly the injunction that the people shall share in the country's wealth. All of us will agree that since 1994 democratic breakthrough, significant progress has been made in expanding access to employment, empowerment, and other economic opportunities. Social protection has also expanded, and the number of people with access to basic services has increased. As the ANC, we are the first to admit that despite these advances, the legacy of colonialism and apartheid remains deeply entrenched in the economy. Far too many South Africans are without jobs. Far too many South Africans are still going to bed without food, while too many are experiencing service delivery backlogs. Unusual deep inequalities undermine social solidarity and make it harder for stakeholders to support policies to promote economic growth and development. You would have seen that the rise of those popularist organizations are emerging out of this, because when people find it difficult to explain the conditions that they are, when social solidarity is undermined, and therefore in terms of working together as communities, we tend to want to find who is the person responsible for our misfortune and our difficulties. South Africa's fault lines have a distinct class, race, gender, geography, age dimensions that disproportionately affect black people, women, rural communities, youth, and persons with disabilities. And our task as the ANC is to lead a concerted campaign to addressing the persistent challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Now, when we look in terms of the 54th National Conference, we have set unambiguous targets to ensure that the economy empowers our people on a mass scale, initiate large-scale programs to address the root of poverty, joblessness, and inequality, and intensify effort to bring together government, the labor movement, businesses, and communities in a social compact. But again, when we did the National Development Plan, the Vision 2030, which remains our guiding program in terms of where we need to do, what we need to do in terms of accelerating the socio-economic transformation in South Africa, we have equally agreed that we needed to ensure that we achieve a shared prosperity for all. Admittedly, low rates of economic growth over the past decade, and now recently the COVID-19, and also the riots, what we call July unrest, and now the floods and the disasters, have made it harder to achieve the targets set by the NDP. In terms of geopolitics, the shift in manufacturing to Asia has resulted in trade wars over the past decade, which seems likely to change the direction of globalization fundamentally in the next 10 years. Growth in China, South Africa's largest single national export partner, has slowed, with unpredictable implications for export prices. The war in Ukraine, others call it conflict in Ukraine, has unsettled global markets and may lead to economic decoupling between blocks of countries. In the short run, the conflict has led to increase in food prices, fuel, wheat, and fertilizers. The long-run implication for global trade and investment will, however, take longer to understand and quantify. It is within this context that the ANC has to craft an economic strategy that will help us tackle our challenges, and also in the national interest of South Africa. The ANC is still committed to pursuing its economic objectives with the framework of a mixed economy in terms of making sure that we do have a role, we understand that we have a role to play in terms of public and private sector. This means that government will continue with the efforts to rebuild the state corporations and expand the state capacity in the economy so that, if necessary, it will be able to make economic interventions which facilitate the growth and development of the economy. This will require us to focus on building a capable and ethical developmental state. The state has to have the capacity to implement the policies and to ensure that it is able to create the conditions that will crowd in skills and investment in South Africa's economy. When we look at the paper that was released, which is Reconstruction and Growth and Transformation, which became the basis of the document that was released by government and tabled by the President in Parliament, which is the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. In the plan that is currently being implemented in government, which is the ERRP, it was negotiated between government, business, labor, and community representatives. I must say that there were issues that which led to now the reworking on the social compact part of it. But the objective was to build a consensus around the reform interventions which we all agreed as social partners that they are important and guided by the policies of the ANC, that we required to reignite growth, investment and job creation. Specifically in the ERRP, they were focused in terms of 7 pillars. We spoke about aggressive infrastructure investment, employment-oriented strategically localization, reindustrialization and export promotion, energy security, support for tourism recovery and growth, green economic intervention, mass public employment interventions, macroeconomic interventions, strengthening of food security, and also ensuring that the land is addressed, the land issues are addressed. But we understood that this was underpinned by ensuring that gender equality and economic inclusion of women and youth were at the center of our recovery. In drafting the documents, there was a recognition that a need for new proposals should be built on foundations established among social partners. Now, we're taking this approach of recapping where we are so that when we deal with the issues around the current proposals, all of us understand that we are not starting from scratch, we are not reinventing the wheel, but we are taking you through in terms of this is where we're coming from and where we are going. Now, we are of the view that going forward, the process should be more explicit about trade-offs, timeframes, contributions, sacrifices to be made by specific constituencies towards rebuilding the economy, mechanisms to ensure accountability for non-delivery on the commitment made must also be put in place. Now, overall, ANC's strategy for structural reform and rapidly accelerated and inclusive economic growth is built on the following pillars: structural reforms of network industries to facilitate expanded investment in sectors such as electricity, telecoms, water, rail, and road infrastructure. Strengthening industrial policy intervention using a range of instruments, including development finance, public procurement, and linkages to key areas such as agriculture and energy. Macroeconomic stability to be achieved through policies to accelerate economic growth, as well as through carefully management of expenditure and taxation, as well as balanced and effective monetary policy. Closer coordination between government and social partners with the aim of accelerating job creation by lifting investment levels from current levels of around 15% of GDP to the NDP's target of 25% to 30% of GDP. So you can see the gap where we are sitting. An expanded regional trade with other countries on African continent and the wider world through the development of well-connected and cost-effective logistical, infrastructural, and financial nodes. Our main long-term targets have to reflect the needs of our people. Through democratic discussion, we must identify priority goals which we wish to achieve during the current phase of the NDR. Now, the NDP's goals of economic transformation by 2030 are clearly not being achieved. It would be important to reset our timeframes and refocus on our key economic goals. This could include, for instance, achieving the following by 2035. An increase in the share of all household income for the poorest, 80% of the households, which is currently around 30% today. An increase in the employment ratio, the share of adults with employment. This which is sitting at under 40% in 2021. A doubling in the number of small formal businesses, including farms, with black ownership of commercial farmland rising, and increase the share of black-owned formal businesses. An increase in the minimum wage in real terms per year, an increase in union density for formal workers, which was at around 35% in 2019, an increase in the share of young people aged between 18 to 25 with matric, so that we can increase their employability. So this is about not only just matric or skilling, but skills that are needed for the economy. An increase in the share of women employment in the formal sector, which is at 40% in 2019. We do expect that this has regressed as we look at the reports that have been released, especially in terms of the impact of COVID-19. We're seeing that women remain the face of poverty in this country, especially black women. And then we are saying, if we are to achieve what we are raising, there are things that we need to do. Interventions in terms of economic policies, which are summarized in the following. Within the mineral and energy policy, we are saying load shedding is crippling South Africa. That's an acknowledgement, and we have to restore energy security as it is critical for lifting confidence and investment and also creating jobs. Because the more we have load shedding, the more jobs are being lost, the more the country is not productive. We must improve Eskom's performance, both in terms of operationally and financially. The procurement of electricity in terms of integrated resource plan has to be improved. All we are saying here, not really in terms of, because we shouldn't get ourselves more into procurement, but we are saying let's ensure that we implement the integrated resource plan. And if there are needs for us to be able to reflect on it and check in terms of reduction of the red tape, for example, the work that is being done on EIAs is very critical, because now the identification of the rates, what we call the rates, the zones, where in terms of electricity or new generation capacity is being done, are assisting, but we want to see consistently the reduction of the time it takes for approvals. It will help in terms of ensuring that we have stabilization around electricity, but also we're paying attention into the transmission side and also demand management side. The ANC will encourage exploration of mineral and gas, particularly for those critical resources linked to energy transition. Around infrastructure, we've actively said previously that infrastructure development becomes the key in terms of our recovery, but we are saying the important one is that we have to ensure that there is actually partnership between private sector and public sector, so that we can see the infrastructure investments strongly and we can start seeing all the construction across the country, but more focus is around closing the gap between rural and urban divide. An achievement of this project management capability must be built, and regulatory complexities must be reduced for potential investors. We do think that there's still a lot of red tapes around construction area, around infrastructure development, and that's why it's hampering the work that needs to be done. We continue around the issue of Regulation 28 of the Pension Fund to help mobilize funds for infrastructure. On manufacturing, we are saying South Africa needs to arrest the decline in its manufacturing sector and rejuvenate more inclusive industrialization through better coordinated industrial policy. But again here, simplifying the process, ensuring that the red tapes are reduced and we can be able to see manufacturing happen. This should focus more on labor-intensive industries within the manufacturing sector. And we'll come to the digital environment, because we believe that this will link to the manufacturing space. South Africa will need to improve its skills base and look to leverage localization and procurement instruments to boost the domestic manufacturing side. The improvement in industrialization will also require efficient infrastructure, improved integration, as well in terms of linking us to the rest of the region and the world for more investment in innovation. On the digital economy and the fourth industrial revolution, South Africa's recent release of Spectrum, which Comrade Dakota will go into detail on those areas as he does the battle of ideas and all that. But from an economic point of view, we acknowledge in this, and we do believe that this will support universal access for affordable and high-speed broadband, and also the work around that needs to be done in ensuring that we connect to the country. But we do acknowledge that the cyber security must also be strengthened for protection of personal data, government databases, and state-owned entities. On green economy, economic development and job creation, South Africa, along with the rest of the world, must continue to transition towards a low-carbon economy and seek to exploit the opportunities created by the green economy. We've got to pay attention around the transitional method, because we are quite strong that the just transition must not leave anyone behind and must include viable paths for workers and local communities dependent on the current high carbon activities. Local and international funds must be mobilized to ensure that there is a just transition. But when we talk about funding for climate change, we are saying it must be transparent in terms of the conditions. It must not compromise our sovereignty as a state. Land reform agricultural policy. I see you looking at your watch. I've taken long. Land reform agricultural policy, food security and rural economy. I'll just highlight 2 areas because they are more in detail in our paper. But the growth of the agricultural sector must be better supported through a more stable and conducive policy environment, better infrastructure improvement, municipality in terms of work between the 3 spheres of government. We must ensure that we continue to seek export market for the country's growing agricultural sector because there is quite a lot of opportunities, but the inclusion of black farmers in the agriculture and agro-processing sectors require increased funding in this area, and it's quite important. On state-owned entities, we are saying that the state-owned entities are critical for providing economic infrastructure that facilitate private sector economic activity, by the business models of many SOEs are increasingly challenging. So we have that challenge, but also the issue that we must undertake is comprehensive review of the state-owned entities portfolio to determine the balance of evidence in terms of what we have talked about previously, that where we should consolidate, where we should reposition. So as we receive the reports of the last conference resolutions, we'll look into what have been done, how far are we, and what remains strategic. The question is around which are the strategic entities that must be protected in terms of the country, in terms of ensuring that they are able to service the country and serve the developmental need of this country. We reflect on the paper on employment programs and fair in terms of labor, where we are reflecting that there must consistently be a protection of labor legislation workers, especially in compliance with labor legislation. And there is acknowledgement that there is a need to look in terms of the processes around CCMA and strengthen them, and that work. On the skills, we are acknowledging that the skills, scarce skills list has been released, but there are critical skills that we still need for the economy, and therefore work needs to be done in this area. In the paper, you'll see that we are talking about more the skills revolution required to support technical and vocational education, and also community education and training colleges, and a radical reduction of the school dropout is needed. But more work is being done by the education subcommittee in this. Our focus is more around the skills for the economy. On SMME, cooperatives, township and village economies, this is an area that most of the time we've received critical or criticism around, that we don't seem to be doing well, but we don't seem to be paying attention to it. So one of the things that we are proposing, which is a major thing that we do believe that will assist, is that as a means of fostering economic development, inclusive growth and employment creation, small, macro and medium-sized enterprises, cooperatives, as well as townships and village economies have to be understood that they have a role to play. And then we are proposing that the removal of macro enterprises which operates best in the informal sector are out of the small business regime, so that they are able to be protected from the red tape and the requirements. Develop a national strategy for macro enterprise, which will include the development of a microfinance act. It's one of the new proposals that would pick up in the document as well around small and especially the informal economy. And as I said, this is an area where majority of the black women who are remaining the face of the poverty in the country are playing. As I conclude on the African trade and development, we are saying that the African continental free trade area helps to connect 1.3 billion people by buying power across the continent. There's quite a great work that needs to be done in this and opportunities. We must use it as an instrument to advance the developmental integration of African economies. And we do believe that we should be able to reflect properly around this, because it has an opportunity to create African production for higher values, but there's still an acknowledgement that as you look across the countries on the continent, there's issues of legislation that is different across requirements, and that will need for us to be able to pay attention and make as South Africa our own contribution as we start this process. So to further strengthen the proposals that we are having, as the ETC, we will be having a series of dialogues in which we will invite experts in various sectors, business, labor, and South Africans to give their inputs. The first one will start on at Inanda. We are hosting it on the 2nd of June at Inanda at 1700. But people should not just walk in. You need to reserve your space. It's on first come, first service, online booking through our PBF. But also we are requesting written submission on the documents, because I've not gone into everything based on time, but the documents are available, so would appreciate written submission. This is to stimulate discussions in the country, but we are calling for all South Africans to be part of this, because policies of the ANCs become policy of the country, and therefore it is at this point that we need everyone to come on board. So the details where you submit will be provided by the communication team. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade Mamoloko. I'm now going to invite Comrade Dakota Lehuete to speak on the Battle of Ideas discussion document.
Thank you very much, Comrade Amos. Good morning to all the colleagues from the media as well as the listeners and viewers at home. Look, we are dealing with the part that deals with communication and battle of ideas. I think we need to start with the understanding of the context that we are tabling these particular policy discussion documents immediately after coming out of lockdowns, having a challenge of the scourge of COVID-19, having an economy that has released over 2 million people out of their jobs, having a challenge of floods, having a challenge of the slow economic growth. And I think these are some of the contexts that we need to understand, that as a governing party we have the burden of leadership and responsibility to ensure that we deal with all these particular challenges. And we must also say that we are at a stage where we are dealing with intermittent electricity supply, which has a negative impact on the economy. The matter of load shedding, as Comrade Mamoloko has already alluded. And this particular load shedding also affects us at the level of communication in terms of our broadband aspirations, and ensuring that we make communication accessible to all. And I think it's a matter that we need to take into consideration. But on our proposals in terms of our documents, what you have or what we have already went through, there are specific policy areas that we are looking at as the subcommittee. Under the section on battle of ideas, we deal with the changing dynamics in the national discourse and draws mainly from the assessment of the balance of forces. At this space, we know that as the ANC, we are challenged from all quarters, not only political, even economic, in terms of ensuring that we leverage the life of all South Africans and create a better life for all. And I think it's a matter that even some amongst us have a belief that it's unachievable, insurmountable, but we are confident that the future looks very bright for all South Africans under the African National Congress. Under the media section, we'll examine policy development in respect to media diversity, digital and print media. You'll see even in terms of the suggestions and proposals we're putting forward in our document, they are also included. Also in the section on ICT, our report analyzes the progress against the goals set out in the integrated ICT policy white paper, the ICT policy and the South Africa Connect policy. These are some of the issues and areas we are putting a way forward from our previous conference resolutions and putting up proposal in terms of how we are going to implement them, continue the assessment of our broadcasting policy developments that canvasses topics such as our radio, our television, our digital, our public broadcasting, and the implications of broadcast digital migration. That we have put up a target as the ANC that at least by the end of June, most of our 9 million South Africans who are supposed to benefit from digital migration, we should have done so by the end of June. We have so far as the ANC instructed our government to implement, and they've been doing very well. We must commend Comrade Nchaveni, Comrade Kubai, and the team in our government for the work done so far related to digital migration. We are also dealing with the issue of the postal services. Our report surveys the progress made in licensing of the Post Bank. You know, the Post Bank is one of the issues that we have dealt with as the ANC from the 2007 conference in Polokwane, Mangaung, and now in Nazareth, the implementation of the postal bank, because we would want a bank that is accessible and owned by South Africans, but also a bank that can assist us in terms of the payment or make it easy, payments of social grants and other social amenities which are provided for by government. Because the post office is everywhere, every village, every township, and every town. We will further look at the transformation of the postal services to accord with the demands of the modern society. So it means, as part of improving postal services, new modern facilities and amenities like the internet cafe and other related services are some of the new services that we would like the post office to consider as part of improving and modernizing the post office to the demands of modern society. The section on the digital transformation of the society examines the extent to which South African society has embedded new technologies in their way of life. You would be aware that there is a rollout of the optic fiber as part of ensuring that we make broadband accessible to everybody, but we also make Wi-Fi cheaper for all our people to access it, as part of ensuring that we advance and connect all South Africans into the broadband, and that is what we are working towards and would expect to be implemented. In the section on the fourth industrial revolution, our report reflects on the proposals contained in the report by PC4IR. So all those particular proposals, we have put them forward, but in a nutshell, under each topic, the report recaps on the policy objectives, canvasses how these objectives have been met since the 54th National Conference, and advances new policy proposal where applicable. So all that is contained in our policy proposals, in our documents. You would know that where we are now, we have officially launched our documents. They are now at a level where they are engaged by society, our branches, and all the stakeholders. And immediately after that, they will then have to be processed by a policy conference. After being processed by a national policy conference, they will then become draft policy proposals to be taken as resolution in the national conference that is going to come between the 16th and the 20th of December this year. So that is a process that we are going to undertake. Each subcommittee have agreed that they will engage all stakeholders, be it academics, be it opinion makers, be it the media, as part of our discussion, and to get proper inputs generally from society in terms of the shape and direction that our policies need to take. So that is the process that we are going to undertake. And the same goes with communications and the battle of ideas. You know that in the battle of ideas we struggle over setting of the agenda and the ideas. And you know, with the development of the social media, that particular battle of ideas, it has increased. And it's a matter that we all have to work on and ensure that we improve on. So it's a terrain of struggle that is new, And as the ANC, we can't be left out in terms of this particular engagement. We are looking also at print media, we are looking at ICT, we are also looking at the question of media ownership. Those are some of the discussion in our content, including content regulation. We are also looking at the proposals of the SABC and the model for funding of the SABC as part of our proposals. They are all contained in our discussion documents, and we hope this will work as a festival of ideas in terms of ensuring that we move South Africa forward, but not only South Africa, but we move even our economy to a higher trajectory, because only at that stage would we be in a position to be solid to say we can build capacity in terms of skills development, we can build capacity in terms of job creation and dealing with all the triple challenges of unemployment, inequality and poverty. Because in our thesis, Comrade Amos, those three areas are being identified as an albatross on our neck as a governing party. The question of dealing with poverty, unemployment and inequality, access to the broadband, ensuring that communication and battle of ideas covers us, all members of society. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Dakota. I'm now going to allow members of the media to ask clarity-seeking questions from the two leaders that have just spoken now. And how we are going to run the process is as follows. You raise your hand, we note you, and then you tell us who you are, where you're coming from, and then you proceed with asking that particular question. So I'm going to note hands if there are any. Amina, Sis Nonku. Can you just assist us with the microphone?
Well, a very complicated discussion around the documents on economic transformation, revealing how the ANC, as they say, failed to implement some of its key economic policies as well. We've just been hearing from the Economic Transformation Committee, also hearing from Mamaloko Kubai in this particular position as chair of Economic Transformations Committee, also from Dakota Lekweta, ANC NEC member. There's a lot to go through, very detailed, but some of the biggest highlights that they were looking at, and it's part of this policy document, a capable and ethical state development, how government, business and community leadership are able to work together going forward, and then some of the pillars. There were 7 pillars involved, but 4 of them that I picked up, which I think a lot of people would be very interested in, is infrastructure development, that is for who and for when, food security, of course, a big issue right now with increased cost of living, energy security. We all know about the issues at Eskom. What does our energy security look like according to the ANC? And because of what we've seen with the damage from COVID-19 over the past few years, one of the other pillars from this document is looking at tourism growth as well. There is an awful amount to go through. It did get quite complicated, but just reflecting on some of the big issues that were discussed. But I think for most people, what we really care about is what the ANC and as government, the ruling party, what they're going to do about the energy security, load shedding, blackouts, and of course, Eskom. We'll unpack that for you. There's quite a lot to go through a little bit later.